Joanna to the Shift Book Club. So, hello everybody, welcome to the Shift Book Club. I'm journalist and creator of The Shift, Sam Baker, as you know, and I'm delighted to be here with Joanna Wallace, author of You'd Look Better as a Ghost. I mean, look at that cover. I love that cover. Joanna worked as a solicitor until an autoimmune condition took away some of her sight. She now works as a listening volunteer and trainer for her local branch of the Samaritans and runs a family business with her husband. She was partially inspired to write You'd Look Better as a Ghost following her father's diagnosis of early onset dementia. Her first novel, it's a laugh out loud thriller, which does sound a bit incongruous, but if you've finished reading it, you'll know exactly what I mean. About Claire, who's a part-time serial killer. We'll talk about that in a minute because I'm not quite sure what a full-time serial killer would look like, who sees people as ghosts before they die and has been described as delightfully shocking by Janice Hallett and refreshingly original by Clare Mackintosh. Welcome to the Shift Book Club, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit snotty. I had COVID last week, so I'm still a little bit sorry for myself, but so I apologise for the. Joanna, would you like to start by giving us a little reading to set the scene?
Yeah, of course. I'm going to read a bit from quite early on, when might just be a little bit where, yeah, it's chapter 3. It's 3 weeks since Dad's funeral and my migraines are getting worse. The pain behind my eyes only used to bother me during thunderstorms, but lately it can strike at any time and be quite debilitating. I spoke about it with my GP, hoping for a magical prescription. Instead, he looked at me solemnly, drummed the tips of his fingers together, and told me that sometimes it's good to think outside the box. Convinced of a link between my headaches and Dad dying, the doctor suggested a bereavement counselling group. Why struggle with bereavement alone when you can grapple with grief in a group? He asked. At first, I hated the idea. If I wanted to surround myself with needy, self-pitying morons wittering on about their feelings, I'd join Facebook. Funnily enough, after 10 minutes at the first group session, I've decided there's a possibility I might enjoy it. Being around all this raw emotion is exhilarating. Grief makes ordinary people infinitely more interesting, although sadly it doesn't appear to have the same effect on the venue. We're meeting in a boring church hall on a boring suburban street where the only issue of slight interest is how bizarrely busy someone's been with the blue tack. There are handwritten notices all over the walls telling us what we can and can't do. Do check the windows are locked before leaving. Don't leave personal belongings behind. Do stack chairs away before leaving. Don't stack more than 6 chairs in a pile. Do read the fire regulations pinned to the notice board. Don't stack more than 6 chairs in a pile. I wonder why the 6-chair rule has got 2 notices. What happens when a 7th is added to the top of a stack? I can't be the only person tempted to find out. A circle of chairs has been positioned in the middle of the hall, and we all chose one to sit down on. Those first few moments were awkward, with obligatory smiles boomeranging around the group. But then everyone got their phones out and stared down at the screens, and we all pretended we weren't sitting in a circle of strangers. Is that enough, or did you want any more?
No, that's plenty. That is written like somebody who sat in one of those circles.
Yeah, I didn't go to a bereavement counselling group, but I have gone to mindfulness groups before, and I think that's that helped to me when I was writing the bereavement group sessions.
Right. Okay, so tell us, where should we start? I guess let's start with the title. Tell us where the title came from.
So this, I think, was the 4th title that this book had. The first one was Mourning Has Broken, as in mourning, as in grieving. The second one was Come to Grief, because there's a character that's always talking about cliches. Then it had a dreadful title, which was Today I Drown. That actually was the title, though, when I submitted it, and it did get an agent, got me an agent. And then it was when I was talking to Miranda Jewis, who's the publishing director at Viper, on a Zoom call, and I was really nervous because up until that point I'd just been sending out my writing for about 11 years trying to get an agent, And suddenly I was on a Zoom call with a publishing director, and she just said to me she loved the book, but she hated the title. And she kind of put me on the spot and said, come on, just think of a better title. It has to have a catchy title. And we'd just been talking about how Claire sees her victims as ghosts before they die. So I just suddenly said, you'd look better as a ghost, like that. And she said, yeah, okay, that will do. So I think it was just being put on the spot.
That's really interesting because it's such a good title, and it so much chimes with, trends in publishing. Kind of 10 years ago, you couldn't write a book. You weren't allowed to have words like funeral or death or anything, bleak or negative in the titles. And now that just feels like, it almost feels like a title that came before the book, almost. And I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah. No, it is a lot of people do like the title. And when I was at Harrogate in the summer, the security guards at Harrogate Festival, we had tote bags and t-shirts, and they were reading it when we first walked in, and they said, can we have that t-shirt? Why isn't that a phrase? I want to, when I go to see my in-laws that I don't like, I just want to wear that t-shirt saying you'd look better as a ghost. So we did actually give them t-shirts. I don't know whether they're wearing them when they visit people they don't like, but they that's what they said they wanted to do. And they said we should get it printed on cards.
Yeah, then did you do that?
No, we haven't yet. I don't know whether marketing is going to do that. That was one of their ideas, but I'm not sure yet.
So if it didn't start, if the idea for the book didn't start with that title and with the idea of Claire seeing people as ghosts, where did it start?
It started so this is my third book that I've written over the course of like 11 years. And the first two, because I've never done a writing course or anything, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And each time I finished my earlier books, I would just send out the first draft, really excited because I'd finished writing a book. And then the rejections would start, kind of come rolling in. And this one, I started writing it. My dad, who I was very close to, he was only in his like 60s, he wasn't old, and he very suddenly became really unwell with dementia. And his dementia actually killed him within 18 months. So it was very, very quick. Yeah. And I think he'd probably been kind of disguising the symptoms for a short while. But from our point of view, he just became kind of psychotic overnight. And then he was sectioned. He was in a psychiatric ward for over, I think, almost 13 months. And then he moved to a care home where he passed away. And was without doubt, he was the strongest, funniest, most successful person I've ever known. Such a really strong man. He'd come over from Ireland at the age of 16 with no qualifications. He got kicked out of school when he was 13. He started working on a building site in London and just started running the building site as a teenager, and went on to set up quite a successful bricklaying firm in London. So he was so driven, so successful. And then he literally lost his mind. And I used to go and visit him every day in the psychiatric ward because I was so worried about him. I wanted to make sure he was okay. And then I would visit him, and then I would go pick my children up from school, trying to juggle work like everyone does. And then each day when I'd get the children to bed, I would the only way I could get any peace, because all I could hear in my mind was my dad's voice, because all he wanted was for us to get him out of the psychiatric ward, but we couldn't because he was under section. So I would just hear him, crying out, just get me out, get me out. And the only way I could have any kind of peace was to open my laptop and just to write, which is what I've always written, no matter how I'm kind of feeling. It's where I put all my emotions. And I didn't set out to write a book about a serial killer at all. I just literally, I think it just started with me writing, I'm so angry. I am so angry at dementia. I was furious at it because, it took everything. It took his mobility, his sanity, his memory. But the worst thing that made me so enraged was that it took his dignity. And that's what really, I was so angry, and I felt so powerless that I couldn't do anything to help him, when he'd always been the person in our family that everyone had gone to for help, and he would help everyone, and none of us could help him. And so it sounds really strange, and it is hard to explain, but from this kind of anger that I was just writing on my laptop, Claire just literally emerged, this character that was born out of my rage, but was, whereas I was at a time when I was very powerless, she was strong, and there was a really weird kind of comfort in her strength, in her power, in her really, really dark humor. And it got to the point that each night I would come back, I'd get the kids to bed, I would open up the laptop, and I would think, oh yeah, I'm with Claire again. It was almost like it was almost like therapy through that time. And then Dad passed away. So then I was grieving, and all the parts that I was writing about the bereavement groups and everything were written whilst I was grieving for my dad. So it kind of all came from there, really.
It's really interesting when you talk to novelists about where a character comes from. That characters quite often are either, built from the ground up with layers and layers and layers of okay, this is what I think they think, this is what I think they would react to, and that picture of them is slowly built, like pixels coming into frame. Or people say they just walked in.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Anne Cleves, who created Vera and Shetland. And when she wrote the first Vera book, it wasn't even meant to be about Vera, it was meant to be a standalone, and she was in a church, and she was a bit stuck, and she says she just thought, okay, I'm going to open the door and see who walks in, and in walked Vera, and that was that, and she took over. And I'm not saying one way is better than another, but I always think it's so fascinating when people describe that character almost emerging fully formed and having very strong voice and opinions. Kind of can't help wondering where it comes from, that whether there's some kind of a, not that I think you wish that I'm sure there is somebody whose head you'd like to stick in a fish tank. I've certainly got people whose heads I'd like to stick in a fish tank, but I do wonder if there's an element of alter ego.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is definitely. And like you say, it is really, really hard, because a lot of people have talked about Claire's voice and where does Claire's voice come from. And the only thing I can really put it down to was she was kind of a manifestation of my rage that I couldn't put anywhere, because when someone you love is dying of a terminal illness, you can't go on a protest, you can't sign a petition. It's nobody's fault, it's nobody to blame. And I think that kind of helplessness, I found it really, really difficult to deal with. It was interesting thing about learning about myself and realizing that I am someone, I'm always trying to look for ways to help, and look if there's a problem, I'll always try to fix it. And when you really can't, it's a horrible feeling. And I think that she gave me this outlet to put everything that I was feeling. And then once I'd written the first kind of couple of chapters, I felt like she just took off then, and I felt like I knew her. And I was, even though she is obviously a terrifying, awful person, I kind of enjoyed her company. I really did enjoy her company.
But you say that she's an awful person, and I'd love to know what everybody thinks in the chat, actually. But I mean, of course she's an awful person, she's a serial killer. But you do a really good job of making us root for her. I spent most of the second half of the book thinking, oh God, no, how is she going to get out of that? And we are really wanting her to get out of it, despite the terrible things she'd done. And how did you manage to pull that off? Was that like a balancing act? Is there a lot of editing involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually finished writing this book at the beginning of 2018. And again, because I didn't know what I was doing, I was all excited. Yay, I've finished the book, sent it all out, didn't edit it. It was first draft because I just didn't know. And nobody else had read it. And it got, two agents at that point did ask to read the whole manuscript, but then it got rejected by everybody. So I just saved it on my laptop for 2 years, just kind of didn't think about it. until it was in one of the lockdowns. I don't know why, because I'd kept all my writing completely secret up until then. Nobody knew that I wrote, apart from like my husband and my kids would see that I was typing at the laptop, but I just didn't tell anyone else. And then in one of the lockdowns, I don't know why, I started mentioning to a couple of friends that I liked writing. They read a couple of my short stories, and then they asked if I had anything else to read because they enjoyed them. And I said, oh, I've written this book about a serial killer, but it's not very good. It's been rejected by everybody. But I couldn't find it for ages on my laptop because it had a different title. I couldn't remember what I'd saved it as. Anyway, I found it, sent it to a couple of friends, and then I reread it, and I hadn't read it for 2 years. And immediately in that first draft, there was a disconnect between the reader and Claire. And I think just reading it with fresh eyes, I could see. And I realized the reader doesn't have to like Claire, but the reader does have to be invested in her story, because otherwise, if the reader is in the head of a serial killer and they just want the serial killer to be caught, or they don't care, the reader can just stop reading. And I wanted the reader to want to get to the end of the book. I wanted them to want to turn the pages. So that's at that point, in the first draft, there wasn't any flashback scenes. So there wasn't any of the then chapters. So I put them in. And then I really, really, really worked on the humor, because I thought in the first draft, I think being inside Claire's head for the whole book, it was a little bit too gruesome, a little bit too suffocating. Yeah. And I thought if I can balance out some of the horror with humor, kind of quite shocking, trying to really get laugh out loud humor, that will that will keep the reader okay. It will make it a nicer place to be inside her head, because the reader will think, okay, so she's done this horrendous murder, but she's probably going to have a very funny observation about this character. So I think it was those two things. I think it was in the editing. It was adding in the flashback scenes, so we get a little bit. First of all, the flashback scenes are written in the third person, so we get a little bit of a break from being inside Claire's head. And to see Claire as a child, I think, builds up that connection between the reader and Claire. And then secondly, we are just more forgiving of people that make us laugh. I know we not forgive them everything, certainly shouldn't forgive them murder, but we just are. And I just thought if I can balance out some of the horror with humor, that will hopefully build a connection as well.
So when you first wrote it, you didn't have the origin story, if you like, what made her that way?
No, I didn't. In my mind, I just thought she is just the way that she is. And then when I reread it after 2 years, I thought we need to have some idea of why she is the way that she is. And I'm in two minds. I think she is just that way anyway. I think that if she'd had a really loving mother, I think she still would have turned out how she did. But it's kind of the nature and nurture debate. And I just think it fleshes out her character a little bit. And I think to see Claire as a child, it does build a connection between the reader, and it does just make the reader a little bit more understanding of where she is today.
Yeah, in a way, I don't know whether everybody else agrees with this, but in a way, despite the really horrific stuff that Claire does do during the course of the book, some of the flashbacks are more shocking. And so in a weird way, they kind of put it not into context, but there are kind of like tears of horror, I suppose.
Yeah.
When you were, how did you balance that? Because some of the, you addressed some, a lot of abuse, emotional abuse, child abuse, elder abuse. When you were writing, how were you thinking about balancing that kind of real laugh out loud, almost front row of funeral laughter with, some real trauma?
Yeah, I think how I don't know exactly how I was doing it. I knew that when I was reading it back, I'd write a bit and then I would read it back, and like a couple of days later, and I'd think, right, I definitely need, that's the point where we need a laugh. We need a laugh there, because otherwise it gets too heavy. And it was just, I don't know, there's kind of a rhythm to the words, and I could kind of tell when I was thinking right now. And there were some sentences I tried to get a bit of horror and a bit of humor in the same sentence to see if I could. And it was just kind of, just balancing it out, really, just reading through and thinking, right, I really wanted to explore the whole elder abuse in particular, because when Dad was had dementia, it just seemed like, and I know it wasn't, but it just seemed like every time I looked at the newspaper, there was a story about a family that had put up a camera and they'd caught like their, you know, on camera their loved one being abused. And it didn't happen to my dad at all. The carers that were with my dad were brilliant, but it was that fear that something like that could happen, and that fear that was happening to other people, that kind of drove that I wanted it was really important to me that storyline went in there. But that is really, really, I didn't want it to come across as a kind of like a lecturing or anything like that. I think if I can wrap it up in humor and kind of put a mystery as well. And ultimately what I was trying to write, and what I always try to write, is something that's really, really kind of entertaining. I just want it to be like escapism. I want people to just kind of want to know what's happening. But at the same time, it is important for me when I write that I just drop in some things that are kind of important to me. And what's important to me is people who I don't think have a particularly loud voice. So that's people with not just dementia, with lots of serious mental health issues. And also I do think children who are kind of emotionally neglected, I don't think they have a hugely loud voice. So I kind of those were the things, the serious issues that I wanted to put in. But I also wanted to make it a book that would appeal to young people, older people. And I just kept thinking, right, I've got to make this entertaining. I just have to. And the best way for me to make it entertaining was to make Claire's kind of, and some of the other characters, just kind of funny, and just some of the stuff that was going on in life just funny. And that just kind of was meant reading. And if I would read back and laugh out loud, then I knew I was hitting it right. If I would read back and think, no, that's not really landing, I would just keep trying again and rewriting it until I felt that it was good enough.
It's in the chat, Nicola has said how she loves Claire's sense of righteousness. And I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier about that kind of, that fury. She has got like she's got a righteous fury, hasn't she? And then,
Yes.
I like Vicky's saying she loved the little things that made her want to kill people. But I mean, I think that those were the things that they really land, don't they? Because, you know, you do want to kill that. I mean, you're not going to stick their head in a fish tank necessarily, but you do want to kill that person who shoves in front of you in the queue. And, you know, so she's only, I think that one of the things that really resonates about Claire is she is kind of maybe taking that little dark bit of us. Or maybe I'm speaking for myself. Maybe nobody else ever wants to kill anyone who pushes in front of them in the queue. But it's tapping into those moments. I mean, she's quite picky about who she killed, isn't she? I mean, it's not just any old person.
No, but it's quite indiscriminate. They don't have to do anything. I mean, I love Dexter, the serial killer. I think Dexter's a great character. But I think, you know, we'd all be safe around Dexter, because Dexter only goes for the really, really bad people. And I wanted to create a character that none of us would be safe around. Because Claire is going to go for you if you do something really bad. Yes, she is. She has got this sense of righteousness. But she also might go for you if you know, eat her yogurt or something. You know, and I think that it's her unpredictability, I think, which is what I enjoyed. Because when I was, you know, introducing new characters in, it was really fun for me to think, what's Claire going to make of this person, and what can this person do that's going to annoy Claire? And it might be something huge, or it might be something really, really minor, that actually, you know, Claire will think, no, that's just as bad as if you are you know, an abuser. But it's, yeah, that's, I wanted to create someone like that, because I just think it's really fun, because you never really know. And I didn't really know. There were some characters, because I didn't really know how the whole story was going to pan out. And you know, if everyone's read it, I didn't really know how, to be honest. Helen the heron, I didn't know how that was going to pan out at all with her and Claire at all. I just kind of, every time I was writing a chapter with Helen in, I think, oh, I wonder if Helen's going to get out of this alive. I don't know.
Yeah. So you aren't a big plotter then? You hadn't planned it all out?
No. And in fact, I don't get any ideas until I start writing. So the ideas come as I start writing. So it's and that was fine for this book, obviously, because I had all the time in the world to write it, because I just didn't know I didn't think I was going to get an agent or a publishing deal. But I would just write, and then I would think, if I was reading this, what would be the last thing that I would expect to happen? Because I love stories, I love reading books that have got real twists and turns. So I was thinking, if I was reading this, I've introduced this serial killer, it would be quite good if she's kind of put on the back foot now, and it would be somebody that we wouldn't expect. So I just thought of somebody that I'd introduced already, that would, maybe they're not as they appear to be, but then I would think, but how is that going to work now? So then I'd have lots of, like, when I'm walking my dog or washing up, I'd think, well, how can I fit that in? And that's kind of how I wrote it, and it kind of just meandered around. And when I got to about 60,000 words, I thought, right, I have got to now start thinking of an ending, because otherwise I'll write just like how I talk. I will go on and on and on and on. And I thought, I have got to write myself out of this story now. But no, I'm not a plotter at all. I just start writing, and then I see in my mind's eye, I could see the bereavement group, and I could see the characters, and I could really see Welshman. And I thought, but I didn't know he was Welsh to begin with. But I thought, I wonder what his story is. I wonder what accent he is. I wonder why he in my mind's eye, he looked uncomfortable. And I thought, I wonder why he's uncomfortable. And I wonder who it was who died that he loved. And that's, I kind of see them in my mind's eye first, and then I flesh them out. And then I probably do look crazy around where I live walking my dog, because then I almost start talking to my characters, just to see, just to really start to think of them as real people. And once I start thinking of them as real people, I can kind of see how they'll interact with each other. And that's why it's great to have a character like Claire, because then I'll think, oh, well, what's Claire going to think of this guy? And it all just kind of evolves from like that.
Sorry, Nicholas just said she worried for the dog.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I couldn't. The thing is, I am such an animal lover. I don't think I could ever have Claire being horrible to any animal. I just don't think I could write it. I could have Claire being horrible to someone who's horrible to a dog, but I don't think I could be horrible to an animal.
A girl's got standards, obviously. God.
Yeah.
So let's talk some more about the other characters, how you kind of built them in, like say Helen, Gemma, Lucas and Lucas's mom. Where did did they all, is that your process then? Did they all just like wander in, or did you think actually, did you want to have the old people's home in the frame, and was that a bit of a plan?
I wanted to have a bereavement group, and I wanted to have the old people's home. I loved the idea of having a serial killer in a bereavement group. As soon as I had that idea, I couldn't let go of that idea. I thought, oh, that's really good. And I kept thinking, but a psychopath isn't going to go to a bereavement group. So then I started thinking, I hear lots of times people say, oh, are you extrovert or are you introvert? And things like that, like you're either one or the other. And I kind of think in life, we're probably all somewhere along the spectrum of everything. We're not like, and then I thought maybe psychopaths could be on a spectrum. So someone like Claire could be very, very, very near the edge of the psychopath spectrum, like as psychopathic as you could be, but not quite at the edge. So a tiny bit in, which would mean that she could love one person. So she loves her dad, and then kind of dislikes everybody else and doesn't mind killing anybody else. And I just thought, if that tiny bit of humanity actually allowed me to really explore her character. I don't know whether that's true. I don't know whether psychopaths can be like that. I don't know, but I'm just making things up. So that's fine. And I just thought, because of that, I thought I can write her into a bereavement group. I can put her in settings where a kind of a normal kind of psychopath wouldn't be. And so I kind of really, as soon as I had the idea that she could be sitting there talking about grief, when she is going around causing grief to people, but lacks the empathy to actually see that, I loved that idea. And I thought, well, I'm definitely putting her in a bereavement group. And then the plot was kind of developing, and I thought, well, now the other big setting I'm going to put her in is a care home, because I just knew that I would be able to have lots more different characters that I could kind of bounce her off of. And again, I quite like the idea of having this very, very dangerous person just walking into like a very innocent, very kind of normal kind of care home. I quite like the idea of having her looking as like a very normal person going into normal settings. everything in the book is very normal. There's not really anything exotic or anything like that. It's all just, you know, like a living room, a church hall, a care home. And I kind of like the idea that really, really shocking things can happen, you know, behind very normal looking front doors. And yeah, so I think that was it. I had my settings, and then I just kind of, in my mind, I just kind of saw people that I thought might be in those settings. And then once they kind of stayed around for a while in my mind, I thought, right, now I'll start to really explore them, and I'll get in my idea mind how they look, how they sound, and, you know, kind of what their story is a little bit, so that I feel like I know them. And when I feel like I know a character, then I find it much easier to kind of start writing them.
So where did the ghost element come from? Because
Well,
that's almost like a get out of jail, slightly like a get out of jail free card for Claire.
mm, mm. And also I think the ghost thing came from the fact that, again, it was just a random idea that I had, that I just thought, I think as well, I think I might have gone back and rewritten bits, but I think at the end, if I can talk about the ending,
I
she,
don't think so. Let me just check. Has
okay.
anybody, I don't think anybody hasn't finished, have they? If you haven't finished, just shout really quickly in the chat. Ah, Vicky
No, that's fine.
Lovegrove,
I don't
you
need to,
finished.
I think the ghost thing came from the fact that one of the things that's really important about Claire is her authenticity in a way, which sounds strange because obviously she has this huge secret, but her thoughts and everything, she does see people kind of for how they are, and then she ekes out her own form of justice. And I think when I was writing it, I was thinking Claire is going to see through everybody, and I think then that the next step was, I thought, oh, maybe she
Yeah.
doesn't actually see through them. And then I kind of did like the idea of when Claire was young, her being kind of like this kind of quite creepy child that sees people as ghosts, and it kind of just built on from there. And then again, I thought that's it's quite you know, another thing that's quite interesting about Claire, and another thing that kind of distinguishes her from the ordinary people that she kind of so despises.
Yeah, it's I was going to ask you about another character
Mm-hmm.
um who is like just wonderfully evil. But I think we probably shouldn't, because if you haven't finished the book, you might not know that this character is a
Mm-hmm.
bit evil. Um, so we won't talk about that, I don't think. So
Mm.
you wrote two
Claire's
books.
definitely not the only monster in the book, I would say.
No. So many people have got a little bit of monster in them.
Yeah.
But you had written two books before this that
Mhm.
went nowhere. Were
Mhm.
they both thriller,
Mhm.
not thrillers? I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
crime, kind of,
Mhm.
you know, it kind of defies categorization in a way, which quite often is a bad thing for as far as publishers are concerned. But they hasn't held this back at all. But were your previous books similarly
Yeah,
uh
they were crime,
thick?
because I've always read thrillers and stuff. That's the genre that I really love to read. So that's always the kind of books that I want to write. And they were, but um when I look back at them now, so my book deal was for two books, and so I had to write book two in a year, which was really stressful because I, you know, I was still working and have children and stuff. And like I say, I had all the time in the world to write book one, and suddenly you're writing book two to a deadline. And so my husband and friends were saying, well, why can't you just get one of your other books and just, and there's no way I could, because those two were my kind of learning to write books, I would say. Now, I didn't realize
Mm.
that at the time, but I hadn't done a writing course, and I really needed to, and I needed to just see whether I could write, you know, 80,000 words, first of all, if I could structure a novel. And I kind of told myself that I could, but I really needed to make lots of mistakes in those books. And they were kind of just my learning curve, really. So I'm grateful for them, but yeah, there's no way I could kind of use really anything from those. They were just kind of my practices, I would say. So
So
yeah.
what is the next book?
So the next book is well, I didn't realize that Claire was going to be as popular as she has been. So a lot of people have been asking for a sequel for Claire, and I am interested in writing a sequel as well, because it's been optioned by Universal Studios, and that doesn't, they option tons and tons of books, and they only make a tiny, so the chances of it actually getting on screen is very small. But when I spoke to them, they said, oh, have you thought of writing sequels? Because otherwise you don't have to, because our screenwriters can kind of write it, because really what they want is Claire. They've kind of got Claire now, so their screenwriters can take her wherever. But I have been thinking, I think book 3, I will try to write a sequel to this, and I have got some ideas. There's certainly lots of people I think Claire and her hammer could meet, definitely.
Yeah.
But book 2 is a completely different, it's a standalone murder mystery, because all my books are going to have like kind of like dead bodies in them, and it's a murder mystery set around kind of like the politics and the treachery and the intrigue of the school run. So it's all set around a group of parents at the school, because I spent 14 years in the primary school playground, and I spent so many years sitting in PTA meetings and just wondering why more people don't get killed at them, frankly. So I thought maybe I could write a story where one of the parents does get killed, and then it's kind of trying to work out who did it. So I've just finished my line edit for that one, and I got it back today, and it's all fine. So it's all now going to copy edit stage. So there, that one is, I really enjoyed writing it. It's not quite as dark as You'd Look Better as a Ghost, because I wasn't in quite, I wasn't in as dark a space in my mind when I wrote it. But it's kind of another darkly, it's a dark comedy. It's funny, but it's got a mystery, and it's also got some quite deep issues as well in it.
Oh, that premise is going down really well in the chat. I think
Oh, is
quite
it?
a lot of people have wanted to do away with at least one person in the PTA meeting, or indeed at the school gates. If you've got questions for Claire, do please pop them in the chat. That would be great. Di wants to know who you'd like to see play Claire on screen.
Oh yes, I get asked this a lot, and Universal did ask me, and I'm really rubbish. It's so funny. I don't actually see Claire. I don't see her as a person. It's really weird. I never pictured her in my mind. I think because she was so born out of my emotion. But and that's why it's quite funny. On the American cover, which is bright green, they've actually got a silhouette of Claire that actually is the figure holding the hammer, with the blood dripping from the hammer onto my name. And so that was really interesting, actually seeing she's got like a long ponytail and she's got glasses. You know what? I really don't see. My sister is always says to me, oh, it should be, I can't remember her name. Is it Karen Gillan? She really always says that. And I think just because my sister has always said that, but I don't really, I'm really rubbish. I can't really, I think if it does make it on screen, and whoever they choose, it will be really interesting, because that person will then be Claire. But I'm a bit useless, actually. I haven't really seen her as a person. It's really strange. I saw all the others, but Claire, I didn't see in my mind. She was just kind of just there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's weird. Vicky, I don't understand your question. Because Claire reminds me of one of my sisters. Have you met her? And then she says, like, Claire, I mean, not my sister. Which I think you mean, do you feel like you've met Claire? Vicky, I don't understand. Sorry. And Megan said Jodie Comer. But I think one of the reasons that Jodie Comer worked so well for Villanelle was because nobody knew who she was.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that would work best for Claire as well, to be honest. And I think Jodie Comer would be amazing, but I think she's just Villanelle, isn't she? And I think Claire, it would be really good to have somebody who's unknown. But
yeah, I think Jodie Comer has really got a really strong. I do look at her, and even though she's done so much else and been so successful, you still look at. Well, I still look at her and I see Villanelle ultimately.
Yeah.
What Vicky meant is, do you think you've met someone like Claire?
this sounds really strange. So my eldest daughter actually read my book a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, I really enjoyed your book, and I didn't think I was going to. And I said, all right, why? And she said, I thought Claire was going to be really annoying like you, so like, i.e. like me. And she said,
Oh,
and because
great.
obviously I'm really chatty and everything, and she finds me really annoying. And she said, and actually she's very cool. She's actually reminds me more of me, like meaning my daughter. And I hadn't
Okay.
thought of that at the time. And I actually thought, oh, that's a little bit scary. But actually, yeah, I think if anyone, just because Claire is very quiet, maybe she reminds me a little bit of my daughter. But I wasn't aware of that when I was writing it at all.
God, a
And my
therapist would
daughter's
have a
lovely.
field day with that, wouldn't they? It's like,
I know, I know. So no, I don't think I've met anybody like Claire. But then I think the whole point of Claire is that how would you really know that anyone is really like that? Because Claire is how I picture Claire, which I don't really see her as a person, but I just picture her as very serene and somebody that just kind of blends in, and you would have no idea that you were in trouble until that hammer was about to come down. I don't think you would know you were in trouble at all. And I think that's what makes her kind of um so unpredictable, that you just wouldn't be aware that you were in any trouble at all.
Meg is asking when the next book is published.
I think, well, publishers can always move the dates, but I think it's supposed to be next August. So as I say, we just literally just before I came on here, my deadline for it was tomorrow, and I emailed it to Miranda at Viper a couple of days ago, and she said to me, oh, I'm working on it today. And I just got the email saying, yep, it's all looking fine. I've literally got a couple more tiny bits, which will probably take me about an hour, and then it's going to copy edit stage. So I did this one, I really did get a lot. I had to do a lot of structural edits with. I finished it. I was so proud of myself. I sent it off to Miranda thinking, yay, it's brilliant, it's great. And then had a 3-hour Zoom with Miranda, where in the end I just wanted to pretend that the Wi-Fi wasn't working anymore, because I was like,
Yeah.
oh no, please stop telling me everything that's wrong with my book. I mean, she was spot on everything. She was absolutely spot on. But when you're just hearing it all the time, so I did have to do a lot of rewriting over the summer. But the book became much better. I mean, our editors are amazing. I think they're amazing how they can see what's wrong, and they can just kind of tell you that that character isn't really working and this isn't. And they, yeah, everything she said, as soon as I started working on it, I thought, yeah, she's right on everything. So yeah, it's a lovely relief though once we get to the copy edit stage, because then it's just kind of the final touches.
It's so interesting. Timing is so important. When you said that you actually wrote this like in 2018 and then you put it aside and
Mm-hmm.
came back to it, if you had, I mean, if you had sent it out in 2018, probably, obviously, it wouldn't have had the backstory, it wouldn't have had the humor, so it wouldn't have resonated anyway. But also, I think the time just wouldn't have been right for it. Whereas now, probably when you sold it, it was landing into a publishing world where they were starting to think about where female serial killers were starting to take off. And now, when it's come out, it's been published, after How to Kill Your Family and a whole bunch of other books that have made people think, instead of thinking, oh, that's sick or it's dark, they're kind of seeing the humor and the wish fulfillment in it.
Absolutely. I think that's right. I think that is right. And when my husband and I, when we watched the first episode of Killing Eve, I'd written the first draft of You'd Look Better as a Ghost, but obviously it wasn't getting picked up anywhere. And as soon as we watched that first episode, I said to him, it's about a funny female serial killer. And I mean, she's a brilliant character. I said, well, my book's never going to get published now, because look, there's Villanelle and she's like funny and she's a female serial killer. And you just kind of think, well, there won't be enough room for any more. But actually, there's quite a lot now. And I think that there is something quite nice about, I don't know whether nice is the right word, but there's something very liberating about creating a character like Claire or like Villanelle, because, I do think that we're all, we are all kind of conditioned by society quite a lot. And I love my family. I love being a mum of 4. but the responsibility sometimes really grinds me down. And I do think that, you know, I have friends that, you know, once, as soon as we got into our like 30s, people are saying, oh, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to have children? And some people don't want to have children. And then if they don't, they can kind of be made to feel a bit less than. And then if you do have children and then your career takes a hit because you're looking after children, then you can be made to feel a little bit less than. And you kind of spend years and years thinking, I don't really know whether what I'm doing is good enough. I don't know whether I'm a good enough mom. I don't know whether I'm good enough at work. I don't know if I'm good enough. And nobody ever comes along and kind of says, yeah, you are doing okay. You're doing all right. You kind of always are comparing and just feeling not quite like you're doing enough. And to actually then create a character like Claire, who doesn't care about what society expects. She doesn't care whether people think she should be settling down. She doesn't really care that much about what people think of her career. She just doesn't care. There's probably expectations from society, but she doesn't care about them. And I think that's just it was just really enjoyable for me to create a character like that. And I think certainly from some of the messages I get on Twitter and Instagram, I think other people feel like that too. They just feel like it's actually quite nice to read about someone who doesn't kind of conform and doesn't feel like she needs to conform. Obviously, in quite a drastic way.
Yeah. Yeah, but it isn't bogged down by all those expectations that weigh so heavily on everybody. You said earlier that about giving that, you know, you've sold the film rights and they've expressed an interest in you writing another book. But if you don't worry, the screenwriters can do it. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about other people doing stuff with your character?
Yeah, well, I think immediately I felt quite protective of Claire, really. I thought, well, she's mine, especially when they started saying, well, Claire can go to New York and Claire could go here. And I was thinking, hang a minute, Claire's my Claire. But I think at the time as well, and we don't know whether it's going to happen, but I actually had 3 studios bid for it. And so I think I met all of them on Zoom, which was very exciting. But they were kind of all just saying what I wanted, what they thought I wanted to hear, because they wanted me to go with them to option it. And so at the time they were like, well, you know, you can still have control and you can do this and our screenwriters can do it, but they'll still talk to you and And my agent was very much like, look, as soon as we give them the rights, it will be their creation, really. And that's kind of how it should be, because I'm very much about everyone should just stay in their lane. I don't know anything about screenwriting or putting anything on television. I just like to sit kind of on my own and write my novels. That's just what I like to do. But when they started saying about all these plans they were seeing for Claire, and they'd already had a meeting and they thought Claire could do this and Claire could do that, I did then be a little bit like, well, actually, I think I might try to write a sequel. I did want to kind of retain some control over her. But certainly Universal, I mean, everything's been paused because of the writers' strike, which I think is just now starting up again, because they were getting to the point where they were auditioning for an actress to play Claire. But Universal, can't remember what I was going to say now, actually.
That's a very midlife moment.
It is. I was like, you know, it's always something that I thought, oh, that'd be a good thing to say, and it's just gone out of my mind. So it might come back to me. But something about Universal, can't remember.
Are you tempted? Would you like to see if you can get involved in the screenwriting?
Well, not really, to be honest, because I think they were explaining to me how it works and how there's like a few of them and they bounce ideas off each other. And for me, writing is, I really like to be on my own, just with my dog, and just that's how I kind of do it. And I'm always speaking out loud the dialogue that I want my characters to say, and I just have my way of wanting to do it. So yeah, I don't really, I haven't, it's not something that really appeals to me, to be honest. I just rather just kind of focus on my books. But that said, they did say to me, oh, but when we're writing her, because Claire is kind of alive in my mind, they said, if we're just, you know, adding a bit and we're just thinking, oh, what would Claire think in that moment? Can we just email you? And I was like, yeah, of course, absolutely, of course. But yeah, I think that would probably be as much as I'd want to do.
So are you assuming they're going to move her to America then?
Well, they want to set, this is what I was going to say. I've remembered now. Thank you. They said that they wanted to set the first series on my book in the UK, keep it, because they are, and the 3 studios that bid for it, that were all American studios, they love the scene. There's a scene in the pub, which I don't think is giving anything away, but there just is a scene in a pub.
It's quite
And to
early,
me,
isn't it?
yeah, that wasn't a huge, to me that was just a scene in the pub, but they all loved that. Oh, it's got to be filmed in the UK because of that scene in the pub. So I think they just really loved that, and they wanted to set it in the UK, and they want to to end the series where the book ends, and then obviously with a view to further series. But I mean, who knows? I think it's all going to take so long. If it does happen, I probably could write another 3 or 4 books anyway.
Well, there's loads of appetite in the chat for a sequel, so I
Oh,
think
good.
if you've got an idea of what you'd like to do with her, you should do it to stop them, to put them in a direction.
Yeah.
And how old is Claire in your head? Because Nicholas said she sounds like she's midlife, and Vicky thinks she's about 30.
Yeah, I think she's in the book right at the beginning when she's looking at the waitress in the funeral. She says she looks about the same age as me, early 30s. So I think she's early 30s.
Yeah.
So she's certainly got a lot of years left ahead of her but I definitely want to write Claire at some point, in menopause as well. I definitely
Oh my God,
I
she'll
really
be out
Can
of
you
control.
imagine?
Yeah, I'm just going to let the cat out. He's clawing at the door. Hang on. Go on. Out you go. Push off. Oh, she'll be fantastic, wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
she'll care even less about what everybody thinks, and she doesn't care much at the moment. So,
yeah, that's what Nicola's saying. That's what she thought was midlife about her, was that kind of having reached that point where she just didn't give a damn what society thought.
Yes.
And Di is like saying Claire plus menopause equals bodies everywhere, which is like that rage. Unconfined. I mean, this is a bit off what we've been talking about, but if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask you, what happened with your vision?
So it was when I was I was only about 25, I think, and I was working as a solicitor, and hadn't had any problems with my vision whatsoever, other than the fact I was very short-sighted. So I always wore contact lenses. And then I was doing a case in Central London County Court, in front of a judge that was renowned for kind of shouting at solicitors, and I stupidly had forgotten to turn my mobile phone off. So whilst I was presenting this case in front of this very kind of stern judge, my phone started ringing, and at the time my ringtone was the Muppets theme tune. So it suddenly really loudly started being like duh, 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 duh. And he started going mad, like really mad. And my client behind me was going mad, and I was rummaging in my bag to find my phone to turn it off. And suddenly I got this big, like, what I thought was some dirt or something in my contact lens. I got on my central vision, it just was black, but just in one eye. So I was rummaging around to get my phone. And then anyway, I got my phone, I turned it off, got yelled at by this judge. Anyway, when we went to a break, I went out to go to the toilet in the court to take my contact lens out and to work out what it was. And as I took my contact lens out, it was terrifying because the blackness was still there. And I thought, goodness, what has happened to my eyes? I don't understand it. So I got through the end of the day at work, and then I went to Moorfields Eye Hospital, and they kind of dilated my pupils. They had a look, and they said, look, it looks like you've had an autoimmune kind of reaction or something, and it will flare up, and it looks, your retina is literally got like a hole in it. But it's okay because you've got your other eye, and it's actually okay. Your brain will adjust to this. You've got your other eye, and it wasn't affecting my peripheral vision at all, just my central vision. And then it was a couple of weeks later, not very long later, I was at work, and it happened in the other eye. And so at that point, I then had to leave work because I couldn't really see. And then I had to go to Moorfields. And at that point, it was very, very different. So they got this top doctor who was called Professor Bird. He had to come, and he said it's very rare to see someone in your age that this has happened in both eyes. And it was, at that point was it was really scary, because then suddenly they're talking about social services having to come round and make adjustments. And obviously I lost my driving license. I wouldn't have enough vision to drive. And this is like, I was only like 25, I've always been so independent. And I suddenly thought, I can't believe they're talking about me like I'm someone who needs help. But I did. And I still, though, being me, I tried to struggle on. I bought myself like a telescope thing to try to see around these like black splodges and stuff. And but then I just started getting so many bad headaches and stuff trying to cope with work. And law as well. I mean, it was really, really long hours. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't see enough to kind of keep doing it. So I left law completely. But I needed to work. So I joined a temp agency, and I then started temping in different offices. I temped at Watford General Hospital for quite a while. And that just gave me the time to keep going up to the hospital. And I was put on loads of steroids for about 6 years. And then slowly my vision did start to improve. And since then, I've only had one other flare up, which was in 2016, which was a minor flare up, but it terrified me because my retinas can't take too many more flare ups because retinas are really delicate. And so at the moment, it's stable. I've got very used to like where the kind of black splodges are, and I can see around it, and it's fine. But I've since the last flare up in 2016, I've really changed my whole lifestyle. So I don't drink alcohol anymore. I try to eat really healthily. I make sure I exercise, just because I just want to try to give myself as much chance as possible of it never coming back again. Because if it does come back again, I don't know how my retinas will kind of cope with it. And it does seem to be linked to stress. For me, the 2 times I've had flare-ups, it has been when I've been stressed. So I try to, that's why I go to mindfulness courses and, then start basing novels around them. But writing for me has always been a way that I've kind of managed my stress, just putting my emotions into something, having an outlet. And yeah, that's just what I try to do. As long as you can't avoid stress completely, but I do try to just, always, when I'm getting stressed about deadlines and stuff for book 2, just try to remind myself, come on, it's work. At the end of the day, it is work. And if I did miss my deadline, which I would never want to do, there would be ways around it. Nothing is kind of worth kind of risking your health, because I that's why when I decided to stop drinking, I used to love drinking wine, but then I just thought I kind of like my vision more, and I kind of want to keep that. And if I can just do whatever I can, it's worth it.
Wow. And so obviously you are able to write and edit, but
Yeah,
does that give you headaches? Is it?
I do sometimes get headaches, but my right eye is the worst one. My left eye is doing really well. And when I have to go to Moorfields for regular checkups, and when I go, you're in there for ages because they have to dilate your pupils massively so that they can then see around the back of your eyes. So I mean, I always have the most fascinating chats with people in Moorfields, because it gets to a point where you can't read or anything because your vision is so kind of like distorted because of all the drops they put in your eyes. So the only thing you can really do is talk to people who none of us can really see each other. So I've had some brilliant conversations and met brilliant people. And then they kind of take photos of the back of your eyes on this special like machine thing, and then the doctors look at the photos, and every time when they come out, they then call my name, and they've seen the photos of my retinas, and they're always amazed that I'm walking around and I can see, because from the damage that's happened to my retinas, I shouldn't be able to see as much as I can, but I can. I mean, my left eye is actually pretty good now. The steroids, they had horrendous side effects, but they did do a good job. It took quite a long time. So yeah, I think I've been really, really fortunate. I just wish it's annoying with autoimmune things because it's your own body attacking yourself, and you wish you could just tell your own body, look, you don't have to attack your own retinas. But I just kind of hope that I can get through the rest of my life with no more flare-ups. That's my hope.
Oh, yes, I hope so. How traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's so much love for this book. Even the couple of people who messaged me when they first got it went, oh my God, it's so gruesome. And then after about 50 pages, they're like, oh no, I love it now. So there's loads of appetite for a sequel, and loads of appetite for like Murder at the PTA.
I'm just glad none of my children are at primary school anymore. So at least when that one comes out, I won't have to hide. I haven't based any characters on anyone that I knew. Nobody is like, everybody's very different, but
honest. Yeah. Just before thank you so much for joining us, but before we go, I just want to let everybody who's here know, I will be sending out an email for next month's book club on Saturday. It's a little bit late. I'm sorry, because I just got a bit bogged down. But next month's book is called The Leftover Woman, and it's by Jean Kwok. And since you're here, if you would like a copy and you want to email me before the email goes out, then you'll automatically get on the list. So I won't tell anyone if you don't. So The Leftover Woman by Jean Kwok, and we'll be meeting with Jean round about this time next month. Can't remember the exact date. But thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Jo. It was lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you.
And really good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, buddy, for being here. Thank you.